So, hello everyone. My name is Agata Marty, and I'm the country manager of ITEO Switzerland, LLC. And this is my colleague Piotr Herstowski.
Please take your seats.
First of all, let me tell you that it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. At the same time, I would like to thank the organizers of this wonderful venue, huge applause here, for inviting us to share some insights about how to overcome cognitive bias in product design. In short, our assumptions. You know, I do believe that innovation starts with design. And designing for a very complex human nature in this so fast-paced world might be a challenging task for many innovators. In our line of work as digital product consultants, we've seen those struggles multiple times. And we also seen that those limitations lie deep within ourselves.
Yeah, we're the only duo today, so we're going to be doing this awkward thing with the pointer. Sorry for that.
Sorry for that.
Exactly, as Agata said, in our line of work, we do get to interact with multiple people, multiple companies, and as you can imagine, they come with multiple ideas. And what we do, the software consultancy and digital product consultancy, kind of prompts us interacting with ideas at somewhat early stages. But we're not here today to talk too much about our company, but rather to propagate a certain approach on how to make digital products, and in general, I guess products in general, a little bit better. So as I said, our work prompts us to interact with ideas at early stages, and as you can imagine, they sometimes come a little weird and ridiculous. Untested, unverified. They come just straight up bad. But then experience had taught me, and I said this deliberately, experience had taught me that perhaps I should push myself not to judge too early, because I am as prone to bad assumptions as the next person. So how to avoid this, and how to, first of all, make your product better, how to verify whether an idea from an investor perspective is a good one or not, and what to push your portfolio companies to do to make better decisions.
Yes, so this is the funny part about our assumptions, but it's also worth to mention that we are simply ignorant by design and a little bit stubborn. And although it sounds somehow offensive, don't get me wrong, but it is in our human nature that it's telling us to make those assumptions, create those little shortcuts in the ideation process, as well as throughout the entire design process. It is our building coping mechanism that it's telling us to cope with this vast amount of information that has been thrown at us every day from every single direction. How else can we function efficiently, if not by making those shortcuts? Thanks to those shortcuts, we are simply able to arrive at the decision faster. But this mental shortcuts is part of the process called using heuristics. We heavily rely on our own perception. We create our own perspective, subject reality. We formulate judgments. We filter out information. And this is how we also limit our perspective. At the same time, this is how we form beliefs. But from there, we are just one little step away from becoming biased. Like this guy. He's so perfectly happy with the information and beliefs he based on the news, while there is so much more happening in the world. The thing is, why he's doing this is just because it's easier. We prefer and tend to base our beliefs on a certain amount of the information instead of the fact. And, you know, it's quite tricky, because the issue with those beliefs and judgments is that they aren't perfect, and we tend to use them inappropriately. And such a systematic errors are called cognitive biases. And it's so crucial to be aware of this phenomenon in every single step of the design process. not to formulate wrong assumptions.
What does it get to in real life, though? If you would look up the concept of cognitive bias on the internet, there are multiple, despite the internet, there are multiple books, one out of which I would strongly recommend Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow on the topic. But what could it mean in real life? I've got a few examples for you. First one is pretty simple, and it's mostly connected to visual imagery, and it's called pareidolia. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing this. Sorry to all the native speakers if I'm not pronouncing this right. Pareidolia means that we seek patterns in insignificant imagery. So you look up at the sky and you see a face in the clouds. You look at the building and you see a face. You could probably look at the electrical outlet and you would see a face too. What does this mean? Our brains are desperate for meaning, and it's a part of the process of making sense of the world. We basically all do it, because this is how we evolved. And the risk that comes from this is that we might make some decisions beyond our conscious mind. The second one is probably the reason why there is so many articles that lead a lot of people to believe that the best way to become a tech billionaire is to drop out of an Ivy League school. Because you look at 5 to 10 cases, and you might land under the impression that, you know, there is this person that dropped out of an Ivy League, this person, so many people, but then no real data supports that. This process is called, this bias is called survivor bias. It means that we tend to focus too much on a particular piece of data that survived certain selection process. And the last one is pretty simple, and perhaps has the highest influence on the business life out of the three. It's called well-traveled road effect. And it means that we overestimate the amount of time required to complete a road that we don't know, and underestimate the amount of time to complete the road that we know. So what it could mean in business or in real life in general is that we would tend to overestimate the amount of effort to innovate on something, while underestimating the amount of effort required to maintain the status quo. And what could these mean when you are ideating on a product? That for me, it means that when you make one wrong assumption about your product, about its value, about your potential customer, about your competition, it could lead to questioning the legitimacy of your entire idea. Because if you become biased early on and you make wrong assumptions, then it perhaps is going to have a high cost at some point. This company has been mentioned, and this is a story, as it was rightfully said, this is a story that's often told. But I wanted to bring this up through the lens of cognitive bias again. Nearly 20 years ago, Blockbuster has been valued at $3 billion. It had almost 85,000 employees across all the United States and almost 10,000 stores. And they were eventually drove out of business by Netflix, something that everyone knows. But perhaps not all of you know that how Netflix started was by sending the movies on DVDs via post office. So a user would have to wait 2 or 3 days, or perhaps even more, depending where they lived. And this is the United States we're talking about, so some people live in really remote places. So what does this mean? That it so happened that Netflix ended up driving Blockbuster away from the market. And yes, Blockbuster was known for notorious practices with late fees and all that certainly contributed to their downfall. But what I take from this story is that perhaps Netflix diagnosed what users wanted. And what they wanted was convenience. People wanted to watch a movie Friday or Saturday night with their family, with their friends, or perhaps alone, doesn't really matter. But what they wanted at the end of the day, and when the market went, is that they wanted a more convenient way of getting content to watch. And Blockbuster when you look at the history of their downfall, they seem to have slept on this lesson. And when I look at this through the lens of cognitive bias, it makes me wonder, and clearly this is a speculation because it happened so long ago, I haven't been on Blockbuster, and this is probably a secret on what really happened, but I'm gonna make this mental exercise. When I look at the story, I think someone must have made really wrong assumptions about what's happening on the market, that they failed to adjust to the changing preferences of the users. So perhaps it was a conservatism bias, and they just refused to believe in the changing data and changing trends in the market. Perhaps it was a normalcy bias, so they just didn't want to plan for a disaster that simply never happened before. Hard for it to happen if this is a completely new way of delivering content to the user. And the last one I want to mention here is the one I told you about, so the well-traveled road effect. So maybe they were well aware that they need to make these adjustments. Maybe they knew what's coming, but they overestimated the amount of effort required to make these adjustments, so they eventually got driven away from the market.
So, how to design for cognitive bias? How not to let you and your team become deceived by your own perception? Let's have a look on some ideas on how we can actually tackle it. Let us contemplate and stop for a minute on a human-centered design as one of the solutions that could prevent us from falling down into the cognitive bias spiral. Although this solution has been used, it has been used at the same time so widely over the recent years that it somehow lost its meaning, turning into the buzzword, which is quite interesting when you think about it. Somehow, in this human-centered design, we have this kind of tendency to replace human with the user, right? But who then is the user in the human-centered design? And although how she or he represents and its importance for the entire design process, they are just only one part of the story. So this is how a more complete package could look like. For instance, once you combine design thinking with systems thinking, I'm pretty much sure you're all aware of what design thinking is. I mean, we should be more experimental, testing and often. But once you combine those two, your perspective becomes much wider. Out of the sudden, you want to include other entities and the relationships between them. Because human behavior is complex, it's important to identify so-called leverage points that cause every significant shifts in human behavior. So once you combine those two methods, you enter the stakeholder-centered design, which means you can include not only users, you can include all of the stakeholders, have a look on the relationships between them, how they influence each other, how the entire ecosystem looks like for whatever you're trying to design. But still, would that lead us to the solution? Would we be free from cognitive bias while mixing those methods? The answer is, it's complicated. Just have a look at this picture, how different we are. And that's the beauty of it. We can talk and test various approaches about design, but you know, our intention here is just to be more inclusive, more open-minded, and test various methods and try to increase this way the impact of what you're trying to do. So what we also seen in our processes is that with our clients is that the assumptions are not verified at all. And they are so crucial for every single step of the design process. So what you want to do is just simply to gather your team and ask 5 very important questions. First, who we are. So you want to ask them some question that would help them to self-identify. You can ask whatever you like about the the gender, the race, the income, whatever you find and your team finds crucial for what you are trying to design. Second, what impact does it have? So what those identities have, what kind of impact they have on your product or service. But be careful, at this point, when your team brings the answers, usually people have this kind of tendency to barely scratch the surface when it comes to saying why they want to do this thing or another. So at this point, 5 whys method might become handy. You want to ask them why until you arrive at the root cause. Then, who is not in the room? What perspective are we actually missing? And what's the loss? And how we can compromise this loss by this lack of perspective. And then, finally, what might we do else? What can we do better? And who we can also include into this process on which we are working on.
And at the end of the day, the message we want to leave you with before we go to the closing of this presentation is become aware of your assumptions. And actually, if you look at the world around, at least that's my opinion, if you look at the world around, this extends well beyond designing digital products. But so it happens that if you are actively and proactively trying to confront your assumptions, there is a high chance your product is going to be better. And we've seen this with our clients a lot. I want to leave you with a couple of useful tools that could be interesting to widen your perspective whenever designing a product or working with someone who's designing a product. And first one is a straight-up repository, a directory of cognitive bias for design. We're gonna have a QR code to download this presentation later on, so if you're gonna be interested in what this is exactly, you can have it there. So this is a straightforward tool. You can look at this website and see what could you be falling under when designing a product. The next one is more related to timing, and it's a trends map. And it's another simple tool to really benchmark yourself against whatever there is in the market, how it works, how mature are trends, and where they are going. And the last one is, I guess, a personal favorite of mine. It's called Tarot Cards of Tech. There is no magic involved or anything, but this is a simple deck of cards with very provocative questions to all product creators, product designers out there. They make you ask sometimes very difficult and sometimes really mind-boggling questions, and it's all aimed at widening the perspective of our creator. And to close with something consistent with everything we've been saying, to make better decisions about your product, keep looking around, keep looking at your competition, keep looking at your client, how their preferences are changing. Be open about the feedback you're getting, because seeing something doesn't really always mean taking this to the heart. Ask every question twice, and this is really more about conveying your questions to the right people in the right tone, in the right words, so they have this chance to voice out what they think and what they feel. Do empathy right, and for me, it doesn't mean, for me, doing empathy right doesn't mean feeling what other people feel. People are just too different. This is physically impossible to feel what other people feel. But what doing empathy right means for me is asking myself why a certain person feels a certain way, or why they think what they think, really putting ourselves in their shoes. And the last one, as a conglomerate of all the previous ones, is include. Include your clients, include your potential clients, include your competition if you can, include your employees. Make the process of creation of your product as inclusive as possible, so there is a chance your perspective will be so widened that you will have a higher chance of avoiding falling victim to cognitive bias when designing the product. Thank you very much for having us. If you want to download the presentation, you can do it from here. hope to see you again sometime.
Thank you.
Okay to take any questions? Are you okay to take any questions? Do we have any questions for ITEO colleagues? So maybe you can stay on stage for a tiny little bit.
Do we have time for that?
Yeah. We're good. We're good. Maybe one question from somebody. All right, we got one in the back. There you go.
Thanks. Hi. So a lot of startups then include a lot of different opinions, and especially in the early stage, they don't have data to sort out which features are the best one. So they end up in this software feature trap. They build everything, they're generalists and so on. How do they solve this and how not get into this trap, but still being inclusive and open-minded?
You mean a situation when someone is just taking too many opinions and it all becomes diluted and all, right?
Yes, and it becomes a mess.
Yeah, I guess we've also seen this happen, and I would say it's about choosing the right tool to process the input you're having. So having the right designers working with you to choose the right workshop method, for example, to filter out what's important and what's not. Because at the end of the day, the world is never going to stop giving you data. It's just not going to stop. The input is always going to be there. And at some point, you have to be able to make a decision. And I guess the best advice from my experience working with our clients and serving different kinds of things at different levels of advancement of their ideas is really think what methods would serve your purpose. And there is no one answer to this. But from my experience, different kinds of workshops usually do it, especially when you are involving the client, the customer, the end user.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. A round of applause, please.